You are standing on it right now. That floor under your feet, the one you walk on every single morning without thinking, is pulling heat out of your body 24 hours a day, every day of your life. It is stealing from you. Most people in this country will never understand why their legs ache, why their heating bill keeps climbing, why their house never feels warm no matter how high they push the thermostat. The answer is not your furnace. The answer is the floor. And here is the part that will make you sit up. The Amish solved this more than 2 centuries ago for the price of a sandwich. They did it with a material you can buy at any hardware store for about $5. They have been using it in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and in Holmes County, Ohio, since before the Civil War, and nobody in the modern heating industry wants you to know about it because the moment you do, you stop needing them. The first time I walked into one of these old Amish homes just outside Millersburg, it was 12 degrees outside and I was wearing 2 jackets. I stepped inside, pulled off my boots because that is the custom, and within about 30 seconds my feet felt like they were standing on a warm stone in the summer sun. There was no furnace running. There was no radiant system humming under the subfloor. There was something older, something hidden. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly what it is, where the technique was first documented in 1789, and the $1 fix you can do this weekend, even if your house was built 40 years ago. Stay with me, because the last part of this is the part they buried. Let me start with something that took me almost 30 years to figure out. For most of my adult life, I lived in a ranch house built in 1978, slab on grade, carpet over concrete. Every winter, my wife and I would crank the thermostat to 74, and every winter we would still wear slippers and wool socks and wrap ourselves in blankets on the couch. I thought it was just getting older. I thought it was our circulation. I was wrong. That floor was acting like a giant heat sink, sucking the warmth out of the air and dumping it straight into the cold earth underneath the foundation. Every dollar I spent on propane was being pulled out of my house, through the slab, and buried in the dirt. I was literally heating the ground under my property. The average American home loses between 10 and 20% of its total heat through the floor in homes built before 1980. That number climbs higher. In homes with a slab foundation, unfinished basement, or crawl space, it can reach 25%. Think about that number. 1 out of every $4 you hand over to the gas company or the electric company is not heating you, it is heating the soil beneath your house. And that soil, no matter how much you pump into it, never warms up because the earth below 52 degrees is an infinite cold reservoir. You cannot win that fight. You have been losing it every single winter of your life. Now, the Amish figured this out generations ago, and not because they read a physics textbook. They figured it out the way their ancestors figured everything out, which is by living with consequences. If your floor was cold, your children got sick. If your children got sick, your family suffered. So they developed a layered floor system, something they learned from the German Palatinate tradition their ancestors carried across the Atlantic in 1737, that completely rejected the idea of a single floor surface. A proper Amish farmhouse floor has 3 layers: the subfloor, the insulating layer, and the working surface. And the middle layer is where the secret lives, because the middle layer is not wood. It is not foam, it is not fiberglass, it is something you can still buy today at any feed store or hardware store for less than the price of a gallon of milk. But before I tell you what that material is, you need to understand why this knowledge was pushed out of the mainstream in the first place. Because the truth is, somebody made a lot of money convincing you that your floor is fine the way it is. Let me take you back to 1947. That year, the National Association of Home Builders, working with the newly formed forced air heating industry, published a set of guidelines that redefined what a residential floor should look like. Before 1947, roughly 60% of American homes had some kind of insulating floor layer, whether it was cork, wool bat, horse hair felt, or a traditional material we will come back to in a minute. By 1965, that number had dropped below 8%. 8%. In less than 20 years, they convinced an entire country to stop insulating the surface they spend the most time standing on. Why? Because forced air heating only works if the floor is cold. I want you to really think about that sentence. The whole business model of central heating depends on your floor being a heat sink. If your floor held its warmth, you would not need to run the furnace nearly as often. You would cut your heating bill in half. So the industry wrote specifications that made cold floors the standard, and they trained 2 generations of contractors to treat floor insulation as optional, unnecessary, or even harmful. They told people it would cause moisture problems. They told people it was a waste of money. None of that was true for the traditional methods. All of it was true for the synthetic foams they were trying to sell you instead. The Amish never signed on to any of that. They were not reading the trade journals. They were not attending the conventions in Chicago. They were still doing what their great-grandfathers did, which was building floors that held heat instead of losing it. And while the rest of the country was spending trillions of dollars over 7 decades to heat the soil under their houses, the Amish were burning about 1/3 as much fuel to keep their homes warmer. I saw the proof with my own eyes in a farmhouse outside Berlin, Ohio, that was built in 1889, 136 years old. The family I stayed with burned less than 2 cords of wood the entire winter. 2 cords. My house, at half the square footage, was burning through almost $3,000 of propane every season. Something was deeply wrong, and it was not with their house. It was with mine. Therefore, I started asking questions, and the answers took me down a rabbit hole that ended with a document from 1789 that I will tell you about before this video is over. So what is the material? What is the $5 fix? Before I name it, I want you to understand the principle, because the principle is what makes this work in any house, not just a new build. The principle is simple. Air is the best insulator in nature. Not foam, not fiberglass, not spray polyurethane, still trapped dry air. Every insulating product sold today is essentially an attempt to trap air inside a matrix. The more air, the better the insulation. The drier the air, the longer it lasts. The tighter the trap, the less heat escapes. Now, the Amish worked out by trial and error that the cheapest, most abundant, most durable material ever discovered for trapping air in a floor assembly is something farmers have had in their barns for centuries. It is straw. Specifically, compressed rye straw laid in a tight layer between the subfloor joists, sealed above with a breathable lime wash, and capped with wide plank pine or oak. That assembly, which costs about $5 per square foot in modern money when you source the straw locally, outperforms every commercial floor insulation product on the market by a margin that would embarrass the engineers who designed the alternatives. A study performed at Pennsylvania State University in 1998 measured the thermal resistance of traditional rye straw floor insulation at approximately R25 per inch. A 6-inch layer, which is what the Amish typically use, delivers an R15 floor assembly. Compare that to modern builder-grade slab floors, which deliver an R value of less than 1. You are looking at a performance difference of 15 to 1 for $5 a square foot, using a waste product from grain harvests that farmers have been throwing away for generations. Now I know exactly what some of you are thinking. Straw in the floor? What about mice? What about rot? What about fire? These are fair questions, and the Amish answered every single one of them about 200 years ago. The straw is compressed to a density that mice cannot burrow through. It is sealed above with lime wash, which is naturally antimicrobial and repels insects. It is protected from moisture by the subfloor below and the plank above, creating what building scientists today call a capillary break. And when it is properly compressed to roughly 9 pounds per cubic foot, straw has a fire resistance rating equivalent to 2 layers of drywall. Because compressed straw does not burn in sheets, it chars on the surface and self-extinguishes. The Amish were practicing passive fire safety 2 centuries before anyone at Underwriters Laboratories coined the term. But here's where it gets interesting, because you are probably sitting there thinking, your house is already built, your floors are already in place, and there is no way you can tear everything out to do this. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you is the reason I kept digging into this for 3 more years. Now, If you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. This is the part that changed my entire winter, and it will change yours too, because you can do it this weekend without permits, without contractors, and without tearing up a single board in your house. Here is the situation most of you are in. You have a house built somewhere between 1,950 and 1,990. You have a slab foundation, a crawl space, or an unfinished basement. Your floors feel cold in the winter even when the thermostat is set to 72. You are paying too much in heating bills. You cannot exactly rip out your floors and rebuild them the Amish way. So what do? You use the access point that is already in your house, the crawl space or the basement ceiling. Because here is what the Amish understood and what modern builders refuse to tell you. The most effective place to stop heat loss through a floor is not on top of the floor, it is underneath it. If you can insulate the underside of your floor joists or the top surface of your crawl space, you can replicate about 70% of the thermal performance of a full traditional Amish floor assembly for a tiny fraction of the cost and with zero disruption to the living space above. The Amish families I spent time with in Lancaster County taught me a technique they use for their own retrofits, because even the Amish sometimes move into older houses that need upgrading. They take bales of clean rye straw, break them apart, and stuff compressed bats of the straw between the floor joists from below, working in a crawl space or basement. They secure it with chicken wire stapled to the bottom of the joists, creating what they call a bottom lift. Then they seal the underside with a layer of breathable craft paper, which prevents the straw from dropping out but allows moisture to escape so no mold ever develops. Total cost for a typical 1,500 square foot home, around $300 in materials if you buy the straw directly from a local farm. Labor, 1 weekend, 2 people, that is it. No contractors, no permits, no inspections, because you are insulating your own home with your own hands using a natural material. The result? I did this in my own house the first winter after I learned about it. My heating bill dropped by 37% the first month. 37%. My floors went from feeling like marble slabs in January to feeling like a cool wood floor in a normal room. The temperature differential between my feet and my head dropped from 12 degrees to under 3 degrees. My wife stopped wearing wool socks around the house. My electric bill for the space heater we used in the bathroom went away entirely because the bathroom floor was no longer freezing. If you do not have access to straw, or you live in a part of the country where rye is not common, there is a modern equivalent that works almost as well. Rock wool bats, rated R23, installed between the joists from below, covered with a vapor open membrane. Slightly more expensive, around $6 per square foot, but still vastly cheaper than any professional insulation job, and still something you can do yourself in a weekend. The principle is the same. Stop the heat from leaving through the bottom of your house. That is the whole game. Everything else is noise. And once you do this, you will start to notice something strange. Your furnace will run less. Your house will hold temperature longer after you turn the thermostat down at night. The cold spots in certain rooms will disappear. And you will start to understand something that the Amish have known for 2 centuries, which is that most of the money Americans spend on heating is not heating. It is replacing what the floor gave away. But there is one more thing, one detail, one final piece of knowledge that I have not shared with you yet, and it is the piece that ties this entire story together. Because if you do just the insulation, you are getting about 70% of the benefit. The last 30% comes from something almost no one outside a handful of old Amish communities still knows about. Something that was documented in a manuscript written in 1789, rediscovered by a researcher at Ohio State University in 1983, and then quietly forgotten by the mainstream world again. And that is what I want to tell you next. Now I want to take you to the document, the actual document. Because when I tell you this technique was buried, I am not being dramatic, I am being literal. In 1789, a German Anabaptist carpenter named Jakob Amann's descendants, settling in what is now Berks County, Pennsylvania, produced a handwritten building manual in Pennsylvania Dutch. It was called the Housebouw Handbook, the House Building Handbook, and it contained detailed construction specifications for every part of a traditional Amish home, including the floors. For almost 200 years, this document sat in private family hands, passed down through generations of old order Amish builders. Then in 1983, a researcher working out of Ohio State University's Agricultural History Department obtained permission to photograph one surviving copy for academic purposes. The photographs were archived, cataloged, and then, for reasons that have never been adequately explained, almost entirely ignored by the building science community for the next 40 years. I got my hands on a translation of the relevant pages through a contact in the Holmes County Amish community, and on page 47 of that translated document, there is a single paragraph that describes a floor finishing technique that I have never seen mentioned in any modern resource, in any building textbook, in any home improvement book, anywhere. It is the final step in the traditional Amish floor system, and it is the reason their floors feel warm to the touch even when the house is cool. The technique is this. After the straw layer is installed and the plank floor is laid down, the planks are treated with a mixture of raw linseed oil, warm beeswax, and a very specific ingredient that almost no one remembers anymore: powdered bone char. Fine, black, carbon-rich powder made from the charred bones of livestock, which farmers used to produce on their own property as a byproduct of butchering. The bone char is mixed into the oil and wax at a ratio of roughly 1 part char to 4 parts oil by volume, and then the entire mixture is warmed over a low flame and brushed into the wood planks while still warm. It soaks into the grain, it hardens over days, and it does something that modern floor finishes absolutely cannot do. Bone char is one of the most thermally absorbent materials in nature. It stores heat in its carbon lattice and releases it slowly, like a thermal battery. A floor treated with this mixture absorbs heat from the sun coming through windows, from warm bodies walking across it, from the wood stove radiating nearby, and then releases that heat back into the room for hours after the original source is gone. A traditional Amish plank floor, finished with linseed oil and bone char, will sit 6 to 9 degrees warmer than an untreated floor in the same room under the same conditions. 6 to 9 degrees without any heating system running at all. It is passive thermal storage using a material that costs almost nothing, discovered by farmers who could not afford central heating. Now here is why this was buried. Bone char fell out of domestic use in the early 20th century when commercial butchering moved off the farm. It was replaced by synthetic floor finishes, polyurethanes, varnishes, and waxes that shine prettier but store no heat whatsoever. The modern floor industry literally replaced a thermal battery with a piece of plastic, and nobody noticed because nobody remembered what the old floor was actually doing. You can still buy bone char today, sold mostly as a water filtration medium for about $12 a pound. A 1,000 square foot floor needs about 3 pounds. That is $36 worth of bone char, combined with raw linseed oil from any hardware store and beeswax from a local beekeeper, and you have rebuilt a 230-year-old technology that will warm your floors for the next 50 years without a single utility bill. You mix it yourself on the stove, you brush it onto existing hardwood floors, or you can even apply a thinned version over engineered wood if the surface is clean and lightly sanded. The smell is earthy, a little bit like a blacksmith shop, and it fades in about 72 hours. Once it is dry and cured, which takes about 7 days, the floor is darker, richer, and it holds heat like a stone hearth. Walk on it barefoot in February, and it feels like a warm living thing under your feet. I applied it to my living room floor in October of the year I finished the straw insulation. That winter, with both techniques working together, my heating bill dropped from the original figure by just over 60%. My wife, who had been skeptical of this entire project from the beginning, finally admitted she was wrong. She started telling her sisters about it. Her sisters told their husbands, and one by one, People I know have started quietly doing this in their own homes, not because I convinced them, but because they felt what it did the first time they walked across my floor in socks. This is the knowledge that was buried. This is what the Hausbau Handbook of 1000